Today, I'm going to bring you some very powerful and interesting findings. And something that Peter Doggers pointed out in his latest book, The Chess Revolution, is that chess is to cognitive psychology what the fruit fly is to genetics. So the fruit fly has been able to get mapped out. They do all kinds of crazy mutations on it, and it is the thing that helps because it's a simpler form, something people can understand. It's a thing they can work on and develop genetics, and it's been a huge boon to biology. Similarly, chess has been used for years by psychologists to talk about cognition and how it works, right? A way to study, a simple game that can be used to study how cognition works. And so today, I'm going to bring you some very powerful results, I think, about the difference between online thinking and offline thinking. And this will be about chess, but my sense is that the results go far beyond chess and pertain to every area of our modern life. Okay, so let me back up and just describe how I got here. So I've been doing what we call the graduate show on the ChessDojo for years. And so on this graduate show, I'll look at games from people who graduated from one cohort to the next every Wednesday and Thursday. So I've done thousands, tens of thousands of game reviews. And a couple things I noticed. One, people were not using their time. And I yelled at them for years. And I thought at first it was just something that you had to understand. You know, that once you understood that you needed to use your time, that you would use it. Not the case. I also noticed that the online games just seemed to be of lower quality, but I couldn't put any quantifiable, assessment on how much worse they were. Okay, so last month, beginning of February, I did a video called What Your Time Usage Says About Your Game. And we collected loads of data between OTB, over the board, and online chess. And what we showed is the lower your skill level, the less time you will use. And it's very consistent throughout. And we also showed that if you're online, you will use even less time than OTB. And even the stronger players who are capable of thinking for a long time, right? They also use less time online. So now my priors for this were the Daniel Kahneman book on System 1 and System 2, where he's talking about distraction. And I can tell you probably your own personal experience when you're online, it's so easy to be distracted. Then also, I recently read a book called Deep Work, and I reviewed both those books here, by the way. And in that book, there's a lot of research talking about the inability to really go deep when you're online. Okay, so I thought this was great for our dojo talks. We bring it up, and we just talk about online versus OTB with IAM's David Pruce and Kostya Kavutskiy. And there was a little bit of pushback, and in particular, David was not convinced that it was a thing and that he in particular might be immune. And I thought, wow, okay. He thought he was able to think chess-wise just as well online versus offline. Okay, fast forward a couple weeks. Then we did an amazing podcast. I think it's my favorite podcast that we've ever done with data scientist Kenneth Regan. And there we got turned on to how he developed a system, along with some other people, to really dive into fixing the FIDE rating problem, right? So not using just the results of the games, but using the computer to identify mistakes and use that mistake indicator to judge a person's rating, their actual rating. And then you can use that to fix the rating system. Similarly, you can use that to detect cheaters, right? And that's the basis of how chess.com, for example, detects cheaters. Okay, so fascinating stuff. And then it hit us that we could do so much with this. And the first thing that came up was, we could we could test David's hypothesis and maybe even quantify what the difference between online and OTB was, right? So two things. Was there a difference between online and OTB? If so, how much? And is someone like David immune? Very interesting questions. Now, before we dive into the data, I also want to present a claim that Kenneth Regan made. And that was, he said that there was no difference between online and OTB. And he used the fascinating experiment where in the candidates, Firouzja, one of the top players in the world, after he wasn't doing well in the candidates, just spent all nights rage blitzing. Just played all night long, I think bullet and 3-minute. And Kenneth was able to do a regression where you allow for the time difference and basically came up with the exact equivalent, that his strength was just as good online as it was OTB. So we're going to talk about that claim too. Okay, so now let's dive into it. Now the first thing I want to show is this is a kind of standard online time graph that I see all the time. So what you see is the white player is the amount of time left. This game was 30 plus 30, so 30 seconds you get 30 seconds extra every move. And here you see that he ended up with more time than he started with. Very typical. And we can talk a lot about what's going on here, but a big part of it is when you're online, it's hard to focus and it's easier to move fast. It's easier to just be like, impulsive move, boom, impulsive move. And chess strength is so much about restraining that first impulse, right? And looking deeper into the position. And we're going to see a little bit more about that. So the first test that we did, by the way, all this data I'm about to present, I'm very thankful to Matt Tedesco, known in the dojo as Matt Chess. I put a call out. I was like, can someone help me with this? Boom. And he did so much work. So everything you're about to see is from him. And the first thing we did is we put out a call to dojo members and we said, look, do you have a number of longer time control classical games that we can look at, right? So what we did is we got 8 people who played a bunch of online games, and then we had, OTV games, and we had a bunch of online games, so we could compare their strength, okay? So again, this is 8 people. Let's get into it. This is their online, and this is their OTB. Now, let's just look at this graph for a second. The first thing we're just going to notice is the big takeaway, that their average rating, this is relatively strong players who know, by the way, that they need to be thinking when they're online. That their online, by the way, this is produced in ChessBase 18. This is a function that you can do there. That their ELO, 1950. Contrast that to OTB, 2190. I mean, it's a massive difference. It's a massive difference. It's not 50 points. It's not 100 points, right? It's 200 points plus. Dang, So a couple things that I want to show. The dotted line is something ChessBase uses to talk about what average GMs will do. Now, let me just dive into this a little bit. As you go to the right, we're dealing with positions that are more and more complex. Not surprising that as the position becomes more complex, people are going to make more mistakes, right? Very understandable, and the graph shows that very clearly. Another thing, though, to really see in this graph, and we're going to see it in the others as well, is in the online graph, the green really starts trending away from that GM line, right? So the higher up you go, the more mistakes that are being made. And what you see there is the green line diverges more from the GM line, whereas OTB, it's exactly the same, right? What does that mean? It means that if you're a relatively strong player and you're playing online, and you just want to make a judgment call, that's probably fine. It's probably fine. Your intuition is good. You can do intuitive moves online. But when you really have to think, when the position becomes hard, well, buddy, that's a different deal. And that's what we see in the online. When it gets harder, people aren't able to focus and really do that deep thinking, right? You're distracted. There's all kinds of stuff going on around you. And you're habituated to like looking at whatever it is that you got going on your screen. You know, might be Twitter, might be some I don't know. You'll be looking at the stock market, whatever it is that you normally look at, those things are pinging about. And you might not think it affects you, but that's what this is showing. It definitely affects you. Okay, so let's move on. And, let me just introduce the next question. So it was 8 people. And even though it was only 8 people, we're talking about a significant number of games and a significant number of moves. So I felt that was pretty good. I then talked to a psychologist about this, and she made a fair point that really what you want to do is establish a p-value. So just showing, is it statistically significant? To me, that was already pretty convincing. But then I asked Matt about it, and he's like, okay, wait a second. Let's do it a little bit, let's make the numbers bigger. So here was his online methodology. Basically took the top 200 players on Lichess, eliminated any, quick games, and then you had to be playing against somebody 2,200 plus. And so we get 1,800 games basically and do the same report. Okay. Similarly with OTB, very similar situation between 2,000 and 2,400, and we get 6,000 games, so a little bit more. Okay? All right, so here we go. Boom. Here is this amazing graph. Couple things to notice. In the online one, we get the same divergence from the GM line, right? Furthermore, because I think there was more numbers involved, the graph is far smoother, right? When you go from left to right, just the law of large numbers proving the point. Okay. The other thing, just to avoid confusion, is the OTB has a larger number of blunders on the right-hand side, but that's just because there were more games. So I should have pointed this out in the last graph too, but you can see in the online, we start off with 1.5, and here we're at about 1.25, and it goes up, and it's just much bigger in online. Now, the reason we don't then have a rating for this is the beauty of the dojo comparison is we're able to take the same people and compare their performance rating online versus OTB. But you can see it's a very similar thing going on here. Okay, amazing. All right, so then the question becomes, I feel this is very convincing. These are large numbers. I didn't get a p-value. We'll talk more about that later, but we are dealing with very large numbers here to support this hypothesis. Next question. Is Mr. Proust immune? Here's Mr. Proust. Now, the first thing to say about this is that we don't have as many games. We only have 6 online games that we felt were usable. And so it's not quite as scientific nearly as the other ones. But what we do see is the same trend, where as the position becomes more complex, David is not able to focus online, right? That is what this green on the left is showing, the same divergence that we saw in the other graphs, right? And here the points aren't smooth, I think largely just because we don't have enough data points. At some point, maybe if Bruce wants to, prove himself, he could, of course, play a bunch of online games and we could run this experiment again. Okay, so let me go back full screen and talk a little bit about what I think the questions are going forward. First of all, I want to say this has massive implications for a very pressing thing in our world, which is What's going on with thinking? Like, to me, it's a big question as a parent. All of a sudden, it raises enormous question for parenting and education. Far bigger questions than the important ones in the chess world that we've just noticed, right? But far bigger ones for the world outside of chess. So what I'm hoping is people outside of chess will take a look at this and then be inspired to do a deeper dive, whether it's in chess or some other sphere, of analyzing the cognitive difference between being online and OTB. Again, so this is just a preliminary study, I feel, hopefully a gateway study to far more bigger studies that can be done, because it's such an important topic for chess players and otherwise. The next thing I want to address is Kenneth Regan's contention that the online is the same as the offline. Here, I think the reason is pretty clear and interesting, and that is GMs forever have loved to play 3-0 and 3-2. So 3-minute games, 3-2, and some people even like that 1-minute bullet stuff. And I've been among them. I've loved playing that. It's a way to just totally tune out of the world and go all in, and you get an adrenaline boost, and you just get a departure from the world for a second, right? Kind of like, I assume, what some people get out of video games. And the point is, when you're all in like that for 3 minutes, 6 minutes, you can be totally focused. And that's why Firouzja was able to play at the same skill level blitz that he does OTB. Makes sense. But you never have to do any deep thinking. And that's when it gets hard. You don't do any deep thinking in 3-0 or 3-2, right? When you really have to go deep in a position, that's what this is showing us, right? Online OTB, huge difference. Huge difference. Okay, a couple more things I want to end with. What a further study could do is differentiate between skill level. We already showed in the other time video that people who are lower rated have a difficulty with using their time, right? And that's connected to impulsivity, and that's also a big difference, just thinking online versus offline. But that would be an interesting study to follow up on it. One of the problems for the data is most lower rated players aren't keeping their times for OTB, right? If you go to a fancy tournament, right, the times will automatically be recorded, and like some of us, like myself, will write it down manually if they're not being recorded. Okay, so that's another interesting thing to be done. And also, when I talked to the psychologist, she said something very important, is that age would be another very interesting parameter to add. And the reason for that is these kids now are so infected with the online world that the difference between an online and offline for them might be negligible, because they haven't even learned to think in any offline kind of way, because all of their thinking has been online. So that's another interesting thing to put out there for a further study. So there it is. For chess players, it's huge. It means really, to make growth, the work you need to do is largely offline. There are some things, maybe like opening preparation you want to do online, right? But you might have to with the computer, but in general, the progress is going to come when you are offline, right? For the rest of the world, huge implications that I think we're just barely now just scratching the surface of. All right, bye-bye.